Are the Falcons punting on 2025? And will that set up this regime or the next one for success in 2026?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. So if you don't know me, I'm your very, very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering this beloved, incredible Atlanta Falcons football team for nearly 2 decades. Formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I think each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers, that means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So on today's Locked On Falcons, we will be joined later by Locked On Raiders host Q Myers to share his thoughts on new Falcons linebacker Divine Deablo. We'll talk about the plan at center now that Garrett Bradbury is no longer an option for the Falcons, but let's start talking about what seems to be the point of this offseason. And it seems like this entire 2025 season shaping up to be an evaluation year for the Falcons' young quarterback, Michael Penix. That seems to be the overriding goal, figuring out if Michael Penix is a guy not making the playoffs. We'll see. But, I say this because an everydayer emailed me, the other day after my, infamous Kirk Cousins tirade on the podcast, that he hopes every single day that he hears something positive on the podcast. And, sorry, Jim, but really like the only positive so far that I can come up with that we might get in the coming months. We'll see. Again, there's more than 6 months between now and starting the season. So a lot can happen in that time. But the only positive is like maybe Michael Penix is good. That's really it, And because last offseason, the Falcons basically were very complacent about improving areas of the roster then, and they seem even more complacent about improving those areas of the roster now. It's hard for me to be optimistic that suddenly we're going to get a whole bunch of, needle moving moves between now and the start of the season for this football team. So far, what they've done so far suggests that, they're going to stand pat on this roster and just coach them up. Right. Like last offseason, we saw them basically say, okay, we got to get the quarterback figured out. We'll revamp our wide receiver room, add some more speed there. We'll add a blocking tight end, and that's it. They stood pat for 5 months in March from August until they signed Matthew Judon and Justin Simmons due to injuries, right? That forced them to sort of, hey, we can't just, continue to be complacent. And so it almost makes me it almost makes me want to like go out there and like run over Jesse Bates with my car, just like because that's the only thing that seems to get this team motivated to do something so that they can make a move at least at safety this offseason, rather than just doing what they're seemingly on the path of doing, just waiting until the draft. And I'm not, not something major with Jesse Bates, just a little nudge. Yeah, just something that's going to knock him out of OTAs. He'll be healthy to go to training camp, But, I guess I got to say for legal purposes, please, no one hit Jesse Bates with your car. I don't want to get that phone call from Atlanta PD. So please don't do anything, I would say don't hit any Falcon players with your cars, but there's probably a couple on the list that I'll be like, hey, just a little nudge, just to let them know that you're there. But, so the only thing really going for this team is like maybe Michael Penix is good. Maybe he's going to put on that cape. Maybe he's going to be the savior of this football team, be that Lisan Al-Gaib. And a Locked On Falcons Insider hit me up like last week, basically saying, hey, I finally saw those Dune movies. Now I understand all the references that you've been making about Michael Penix. And it just cracked me up that probably like 80% of my audience, even though I've been making these Dune references with Michael Penix for like 4 months, they're just confused by them. And so that's just funny to me. That gets me going. But I know a lot of people, heard that tirade I went on the other day. with Kirk Cousins. Like, Aaron, you're so angry just because you were wrong. And it's like, I wasn't angry because I was wrong, guys. I was angry because the Falcons falconing, right? Like, when have I ever gone a tirade simply because I was wrong? And I know that's a hard question to answer just because I'm so wrong, so rare when I'm wrong about things. But like, I don't go on like all my tirades, for the everydayers, like it's just falconing causes my anger. Right. And so I'm going to go on a mini tirade today. It's not going to be 35 minutes like the Kirk Cousins one, but it's just bear with me for like 5 minutes. Right. Like for me, that tirade would have been a 5-minute tirade on Monday. The Falcons had been actively trying to improve the roster and still decided to keep Kirk. It would have been like, okay, well, they're keeping Kirk. Here's why they're trying to trade him. I don't agree with that. Here's why, for all this stuff, they're not going to trade him, and let's move on and talk about things that actually matter in 2025. That would have been that conversation, and we would have moved on, and we wouldn't have talked about Kirk Cousins until, something happened on Kirk Cousins. I would have been able to talk about Kirk Cousins like 3 more times on the podcast for the next 5 months. Right. But now, like, it's the most interesting thing that the Falcons have done this offseason. And it's like, that's terrible. Like, the fact that I'm sitting here, guys, and saying they cut Grady Jarrett and they kept Kirk Cousins. It's like, can someone make that make sense? I sat here on the pod a couple of weeks ago saying like, oh, well, you could justify cutting Grady Jarrett if you're going to use that $16 million in savings to aggressively try to upgrade the pass rush. And so far, they've added 1 sack to their pass rush total from a year ago, right? Thanks to re-signing Kentavious Street the other day, right? They lost 11 sacks. They've added 12 sacks. Wow, what an incredible deal. And then, the draft, they'll add a couple more sacks or whatever. So it's like, oh, we got up to six more sacks. Maybe we'll get to 37 sacks. It's like, all right, maybe we'll see. But this team had a bottom 5 defense. We knew their priorities should have been to upgrade that bottom 5 defense, but instead their priorities were, let's sign a gunner that's going to cancel out the 6th-round draft pick. By the way, again, that whole tirade about they're using 6th-round draft picks, relevant. Let's sign a gunner. Let's re-sign some backup offensive linemen that weren't even good enough to make the 48-man roster last year. Those are our priorities. They're focused on securing the back end of the roster, right? The guys that are going to be like 45 through 53 on their roster this season. And that's if those guys make the team. None of those guys are, guaranteed to make the roster. Meanwhile, you need 4 starters. You need a center. You need a nose tackle. You need a nickel corner. You need a safety. And it's like, no, we want to prioritize the 9th offensive lineman, the 10th offensive lineman, the 5th cornerback, the 7th defensive lineman in our rotation. And so it's just like this low-key approach to the offseason seems to suggest that, like, we're going to take it easy this offseason just to clear the books of Kirk Cousins' contract, and then we're going to go full all-out next offseason. And I've seen some Falcon fans talk up, they're going to have a ton of cap space next year. It's like, I don't think those people are factoring in just the 25 that you're going to lose between now and the start of the season just from your draft class that you're going to sign and the 5th-year option for Drake London that you're going to extend. Right. And then again, that's assuming that all the draft picks actually are still here. All their 2025 draft picks are still here on the roster in 2026, which again is not a safe assumption given who the general manager is. And so it feels like Raheem and Terry are sitting here planning, setting up someone else for success. Because if they don't win this year, I don't know if they're going to be here. It's the Magic Johnson meme. It's like, I'm not going to be here, It's what I was talking about in December when I was talking about why I was against benching Kirk, because I was just like, like you're kind of throwing 2025 away because Penix is not going to be ready. Now, Penix did eventually show me enough in those last 3 games. And I'm like, okay, maybe this team could push for something in 2025 that we don't necessarily have to use this year as an evaluation year and play for 2026. But it doesn't seem like the Falcons seem to be, of the same mind. So we'll see what happens the rest of this offseason. We'll see what happens this season. Hopefully, again, Muad'Dib, Michael Penix, Muad'Dib Atreides, Duke of Arrakis is going to lead us to the promised land. But that's all I got, Jim. And I know for a lot of folks, it's going to be like good riddance if the Falcons do wind up moving on from Terry and Raheem after this season. I don't tend to think that way. I want to see this team's success. I know many of you guys don't believe me when I say this, but there's nothing I would love more than do a daily podcast about a good football team. I'm going to still complain about that good football team, but at the end of the day, we're still going to be talking more positives than negatives on those shows. But, instead I get to talk about the Atlanta Falcons. And they're going to drive me to get an extra weekly therapy session just to get through this offseason because it is tough. So it's been very disappointing so far. We'll see if it remains disappointing in the coming days and weeks. We'll get some guests on here in the coming days and weeks to give their insights. Maybe they can put a little bit more of a positive spin on things than I am capable of doing, and maybe that will allow me to, they made a couple of good points, and maybe there's a little bit more here than what I'm initially looking at. So we'll see what's what on that. But the disappointments keep on coming because the Falcons did not land center Garrett Bradbury. He signed with the Patriots on Tuesday. And so that begs the question of what is exactly the plan at center? What are the Falcons doing there? But there's nothing like watching your favorite teams live and in person, and getting tickets to see those teams shouldn't be stressful. And that's where Gametime comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Sports, comedy, music, theater, whatever event is near you, Gametime is going to make it easy to get tickets thanks to their feature Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. With their seat views before you buy, their no surprise fees at checkout, and their lowest price guarantee, you can book with peace of mind and total confidence with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So I think it was last Monday or Tuesday's episode where we mentioned how the Vikings having signed center Ryan Kelly would likely mean that they're going to cut Garrett Bradbury, their starting center, who had been their starting center since 2019. And from what we learned is that they spent the next couple of days trying to trade him before ultimately finding no takers, making him a post June 1 cut yesterday. And it just felt like after that, it was only a matter of time before the Falcons would have a veteran center like Garrett Bradbury. And then today, on Tuesday, he signed a 2-year deal with the Patriots. And again, that felt like a layup. Bradbury's well-versed in the Falcons outside zone scheme that they run. He has a history with offensive line coach Dwayne Ledford because they spent 3 years together at NC State. And with him off the market, and now Andre James, the former Raiders starting center who signed with the Chargers today, off the market, basically the veteran center market for the Falcons, if they want someone to come in that has experience to replace Drew Dalman, it's basically David Andrews, who now Bradbury's replacing in New England. Andrews may retire. Like, he's 32. He missed most of the season with a shoulder injury, right? He spent the bulk of his career playing in a gap scheme rather than the outside zone scheme, like the Patriots scheme for the longest time, particularly in the Josh McDaniels years. They were like, how the Falcons spam outside zone? Well, they spammed gap, right? The Falcons rarely run outside zone or rarely run gap. The Patriots rarely run outside zone. So it doesn't feel like a scheme fit at that point in time unless the Falcons are going to really revamp their blocking scheme, which I wouldn't be upset with, but it'll be interesting to see if they do that. And so the reason why we're focusing on this is because, talking about Michael Penix, generally around this league, a common trend you see in the NFL is teams like to pair young quarterbacks with veteran centers, right? It's a big reason why the Bears went after Drew Dalman. The Bills did this with Mitch Morse in Buffalo with Josh Allen. I'm sure I could probably come up with several other examples off the top of my head if I sat here and thought about it. But, the Falcons are like, nah, we're not going to do that. Again, unless they sign David Andrews. So it does feel like the reports were true. The rumors have been true that they're fully confident with rolling with Ryan Newsel at this point as their starting center, going into this summer with him atop the depth chart as the likely starter. I don't love that strategy. I know at some point over the next, 4 or 5 months between now and the start of training camp, the narrative will shift and people will convince themselves that, the Falcons don't need a center, right? There's, the narrative will be that the Falcons offense didn't skip a beat when Newsel was in versus Drew Dalman. He wasn't worth the money. People will even spin it that, hey, the offense was even better with Newsel, thanks to Kirk Tober, than it was with Drew Dalman. Now, you guys know how I feel about narratives. They're, They're just stories that we tell ourselves. They're made up, right? Essentially, they're not based on facts and data and film, right? And to me, the biggest concern with Ryan Newsel being the starting center is the potential hit it's going to give you in the run game, right? Which is going to put even more pressure on Michael Penix in the passing game to kind of carry the team. And the one thing that you could say about the Falcons 2024 offense was that their run game was good, and the strength and the identity of the football team. And if that's not good or as good, can it still be the strength and the identity of your football team in 2025? And so therefore, it puts more pressure on your young quarterback to have to kind of carry things. You look at the Falcons' overall success rate against non-playoff teams versus playoff teams, and this is where I'm coming from with this potential drop back for Newsel, right? Against non-playoff teams, the Falcons had a 63% success rate rushing the football. Against playoff teams, it was 54%, or at least on running back runs, and we're not counting like quarterback runs and other runs. And for those of you not familiar with the stat success rate, basically anything above 45% is solid, 50% is good, 60% or higher is elite, right? But when Dahlman played against playoff teams, their success rate was 65%. When Newsel played against playoff teams, their success rate was 39%. Well below average, well below what you want to see. And so, as I've said on previous episodes of the podcast when talking about this, I don't think there's any reason to think that what you're going to get from Ryan Newsel in 2025 is going to be better than what you got from Ryan Newsel in 2024, which I think was solid for a replacement level player, but is not a guy that I think should be your plan A when it comes to starting 17 games. And again, this contributes to why I'm sitting here going like, I don't think they're trying to win this year. I think they're just trying to save money. That's kind of what it is. It's like the 2022 offseason all over again. It's like, all right, I got it then. I don't get it now, but it is what it is. We'll see how it all plays out. But I think the other thing that's going to be a challenge with Ryan Newsel is the potential diversification of the run game that we've talked about as one of the three tenets that you want to see from this offense. And one of the reasons why you believe if this offense can build upon the success they had in 2024, the play action, diversifying the run game and marrying the run game with the play action passing game, those are, you're potentially losing one of those tenets. And so therefore that has a potential domino effect affecting all those other aspects. They're all kind of blended together. That's the point I've been making for the last couple of weeks and months on this podcast. And I think that's going to be potentially harder with Ryan Newsel than it would be with, another option like a Drew Dahlman or a replacement option, right? Just because we just simply haven't seen Ryan Newsel do anything other than outside zone. That's basically what they ran at App State. That's basically what the Falcons have run primarily the last 4 years. Now, Arthur Smith did sprinkle in some different runs and gap concepts and pulled Drew Dahlman. And when he sprinkled those runs in, Drew Dahlman executed those fairly well, right? And as we discussed during the season, when the Falcons started to diversify their run game a little bit more under Zach Robinson, just a little sprinkling of different run concepts. When did that happen? It happened after the bye week when Drew Dahlman got back. Didn't happen before the bye week. Before the bye week, they was just spamming outside zone. So it's going to be interesting to see, that's why I sit here a lot more pessimistic about, the Ryan Newsel era. Newsflash, buddy, but we'll see. Now, I think the expectation is going to be, it's not about Ryan Newsel, it's about finding that center in the draft. And I certainly think it's a possibility, but I also could very easily, again, just based off of reading the tea leaves of how the Falcons have operated so far this offseason, it wouldn't shock me at all if they don't draft a center, right? That they could just have Ryan Newsel as a starter and Javon Gwynn as the backup. As you may recall, when we drafted Javon Gwynn 2 years ago, I talked about him being that sort of insurance policy for Drew Dahlman at center in the event that Drew Dahlman left after the 2024 season. And you would have felt better about that if Ryan Gwynn had showed more growth in year 2 last summer in the preseason, but didn't really look significantly better last summer than he looked in his rookie summer, comparatively to guys like Ryan Newsel, comparative to guys like Drew Dahlman, who made significant jumps from year 1 to year 2. But we do know that Javon Gwynn is kind of a pet project of Dwayne Ledford. He recruited him in high school. He didn't successfully recruit him because Dwayne Ledford was at NC State and Javon Gwynn was went to South Carolina. Just like, Dwayne Ledford recruited Brandon Parker in high school, and again, didn't successfully land him. Brandon Parker, who the Falcons just re-signed as their 4th offensive tackle. Again, big priority re-signing. So I say all that just because I think there's reason at this point to say that this coaching staff may be higher on Javon Gwynn than the rest of us are. And they're counting on a big year 3 jump for Javon Gwynn to maybe push Ryan Newsel and that be the solution. And so you look at the roster as we sit here today, there's 10 offensive linemen currently on the roster, right? 10 of the guys that they carried is just basically Drew Dalman and Matt Hennessy gone. Right. And again, I'm not going to get into it today, but that will be a conversation for the later date. Like, they could have resolved this if they had just kept Matt Hennessy on the roster, but they had to keep their guy Kyle Hinton. Shout out to Kyle Hinton. He may or may not be one of those people that, I wouldn't shed a tear if someone hit him. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But, they already have 14 offensive linemen on their roster right now, guys. They carried 15 in camp. That's the norm in the NFL. So there's one spot left. And so maybe that's a center that they draft. That leaves the possibility out there. But given that they already prioritized bringing back all these offensive linemen and these backups, to me, signals to me that, and we'll see, I don't think they have any intention of drafting offensive line. I think they're fully intent on going all in on defense in this draft. And basically, the final straw will be if they re-sign Ross Dwelley to be their new tight end 3, or to return as their tight end 3. If that's going to be like that's going to be the end for me, guys. It's going to be like, oh God, here we go. And everybody's like, oh, what's the big deal? Ross Dwelley, he's fine. And it's like, this says everything. But we'll see if they do that. So, I think if the Falcons do punt on drafting offensive linemen, I think that's a mistake that this team is going to pay for in a couple of years. But, Terry Fontenot and Raheem is like, I'm not going to be here. So, like, we'll see. Why should they care at that point? So we'll see. It's just funny because, last week we did that breakdown where it's like, oh, here are the 8 guys that the Falcons could sign to replace Drew Dalman. And every year we do this. Like last year we did it with the safeties. It was like, oh, here's the 8 safeties that have coaching connections to this coaching staff that the Falcons should obviously sign. And the Falcons every year are like, nah, we're not going to do that. So it's like, okay, man. All right. So we'll see what the Falcons do at center. We'll see what other moves they make, if there are any needle movers or any of that stuff. But we'll wrap up today's Locked On Falcons talking with your boy Q from Locked On Raiders on Divine Deablo.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Falcons with an illustrious guest. He is none other than Locked On Raiders host Q Myers. He's going to be talking with us about Divine Deablo, the latest Atlanta Falcon. Sporadically over the years, we've had a Q come on, talk about Brian Edwards and Nick Kwiatkowski and all these other players. Ooh. These former Raiders that the Falcons seem to pick up every now and then. And we'll see what he thinks of Divine Deablo and what he did with the Raiders the last couple of seasons and what he may do with the Atlanta Falcons. But before we get there, Q, welcome back to the show.
I appreciate having you on, man, or having me on. Thanks so much. It's funny hearing some of those names. It's like, oh, dang. Brian Edwards. I remember that one. That was John Gruden said that's T.O. Jr. So, we all know that didn't work out that way. So,
yeah, hopefully this one will work out a little bit better than some of those past Raiders, but we'll see. But when it comes to Divine Deablo, if you're, telling Falcon fans out there listening and watching, what are the Falcons getting in him?
I mean, you're getting a guy that works really hard. I mean, he's that guy. He converted from safety. When the Raiders drafted him, he was actually a safety, and then moved down to become a linebacker. So he had to build some weight. He had to have some understanding of the position. He basically has done everything that the Raiders asked him to do, but he hasn't been like a master of it, right? I mean, he's just done the best that he can. He actually showed last season when he missed some time how valuable he really is, but he's just not he's not your sideline to sideline linebacker. He's not a guy that's going to come away with a lot of balls or, but he's a sure tackler. He's tough. He's physical, right? I mean, he's a good dude in general. Like he's going to want to make sure that the team is in the best position as possible. He just has never really kind of, defined his role. Again, I feel like he's still evolving as a linebacker because, again, he was a safety coming out of college. So, I mean, he did everything it took to put on the weight and the understanding of that position, learned a lot, spent a lot of time in that linebacker room in the film study and everything. Gets injured kind of a lot. So that's the other thing you got to watch out for. Injuries plague him. But when he's on the field, I think he does a really good job. So, I mean, the Falcons didn't pay a lot of money for him. So I think that but what they paid for is basically what they're going to get.
So would you say because of that conversion from safety, do you feel like his best football is ahead of him, or did the Raiders sort of max out what he was?
I think he's probably about what he's going to be. He might get a little bit better at times, and maybe even with a little bit better coaching. And I think that the Raiders and their defensive coaching staff is pretty good anyway. But I think that, he might be able to tick up a little bit. Not a whole lot. Like, I don't expect him to all of a sudden become some all-pro and some Pro Bowl linebacker. Like, I'm not expecting that. I thought that he would have a little bit better hands as far as like coverage skills just because he comes from that safety position. But a lot of times you'll see him bat a ball down. You'll see him get his hands on the ball, but he won't secure the interception. And so that's kind of taking him to the next level. If he can start doing that, that would take him to the next level. But again, he's going to give you everything he's got, and he's a hard hitter. That's what I do like. Like when he goes to make that tackle at the point of attack, man, he's going to hit you, right? And so he's not afraid to be physical. So that's always something that I appreciated about him. But just overall, man, he's a good dude. He's going to do everything he can to help the team succeed. That's for sure.
So just revisiting his time with the Raiders, and I know this has been an issue with the Falcons over the years with their defensive struggles, where there are players that start because they don't have better options, not because they're necessarily good options. Do you think that's a fair way to describe Divine Deablo's time in the Raiders, or do you think he's a legit good option to be a starter in this league?
No, I think he's been a legit option. I mean, he's been basically a starter his whole career, right? I mean, and when the Raiders drafted him, they had a lot of young guys, and they needed him because they just didn't have very much talent on the roster at the time. But, over the course of the last, 4 years since he's been with the Raiders, he's been starting. And again, when he's out, and he's been out a few times because of injury, when he's out, you can see, like, hey, man, the run defense isn't as good. The edge doesn't quite get set as well. I mean, you can see when he's out. And so it's funny because we'll say, yeah, man, it'd be nice to get Divine back. And he's not, he's not a fan favorite. He's not the guy that everyone thinks that you have to have him, but he's a key cog. I think he was a really good player for the team. And like I said, he was a starter, and, the Raiders lose both their starting linebackers in free agency this year, Spillane and Deablo. And I think those two next to each other were pretty stinking good last year. So I think the Falcons are getting a really good player. Again, he's not going to be an all-pro. He's not going to be a Pro Bowler, but you're getting a guy who's going to go bring his lunch pail, the hard hat, all that good stuff. He's going to do that every day.
Well, Q, I appreciate you sharing your insight into Divine Deablo here for the Locked On Falcons listeners. And because I have you here, I'm just curious to pick your brain on, what's going on with the Raiders this offseason. Anything that's interesting, compelling, from your perspective?
Everything they're doing right now is slow and steady, right? I mean, the big move that they made was making the trade for Geno Smith. We all knew that they needed a quarterback, so that was a big deal. What are they going to do in the draft now? Are they going to still draft a quarterback? Could you get one as high as 6 if Shador drops? That's something I'd be interested in. But it gives them a few different options. Like they don't have to be pressed to do something now at 6. They don't have to be pressed to even trade up and go get their quarterback. Now they can look and maybe get an Ashton Genty, maybe get a wide receiver, maybe get a defensive tackle like a Mason Graham. Like there's a few options that they have now that they've got Geno Smith in the mix. They extended Max Crosby, so that was big. Everything else they've been doing is real minor, man, slow and steady, and they're just trying to field a competitive team. Pete Carroll comes in, John Spytek comes in. They brought a little bit of stability to the organization. Obviously, Tom Brady's got a big thumbprint on the team as well. So it's really interesting because I don't know what it's supposed to look like. So I'm just kind of watching them as they put it together, and I'm just kind of being along for the ride and having fun with it at the same time.
Well, I'll just say this with Geno, if you're going to extend Geno, don't take a quarterback at 6 because you'll be in a situation similar to the Atlanta Falcons, where you're going to have to make a choice at some point in the near future that will waste a lot of money or waste a draft pick. So,
that's a really good point, but it's funny because I've thought about it, and I've actually compared it to the Falcons situation, and I know that there's a lot of money in Kirk Cousins. I don't think it was the worst idea that they did, though. I mean, because Kirk Cousins was a guy coming off an Achilles tear, and you didn't know what he was going to be. You extended it, you gave him all that money, and then getting a quarterback, in Michael Penix in number 8, where I think that the Raiders actually wanted him if he had dropped to 13, but Atlanta, obviously, as you know, jumped up and got him. I thought that was great insurance, and now you move forward, you have a guy, and I mean, I guess they're sticking with Kirk Cousins for now. I don't know kind of why, but okay. I mean, I guess that's the big scenario that they have in front of them. But I'll tell you what, if the Raiders have Geno Smith and were to get a guy like, say, Shador at 6, I wouldn't mind letting him sit for a year and then, being able to put him into the mix and maybe even trading Geno if you feel like you've got everything you need. I mean, I think there's a few options that they have, but I have compared the Raiders situation to the one of the Atlanta Falcons multiple times for that exact reason that you mentioned.
Well, I'll just say, if you are going to do that, 1 year of guaranteed money for Geno at that point.
There you go.
Smart
man.
Yeah,
smart man.
Learn from the Falcons' mistake there. But we'll see what the Raiders decide to do. They certainly will have a lot of intrigue with that top 10 pick, and see what other moves they make. And maybe there's other future Falcons currently out there for the Raiders, so we might be talking again, Q, at some point in the near future. But I appreciate you joining me. Let the people know where they can find your stuff. And some of the other things that you're going to be talking about on Locked On Raiders in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah, man. I mean, anytime we get a chance to collaborate and hook up, it's always great. So definitely appreciate you having me on the show. Twitter at your boy Q254. Of course, the Locked On Raider podcast daily, Monday through Friday, as we do here on the Locked On Podcast Network. ESPN, Joe and Q, ESPN Radio, 12 to 3 Eastern Time. Raider Nation Radio, 5 to 8 Eastern Time, 2 to 5 Pacific Time. I don't know. I'm on some radio somewhere. I'm on some podcast somewhere. I got a microphone in front of me at all times. Let's put it like that. I'm glad to be with you, my man.
So, guys, thanks to your boy Q for joining us and sharing his insights in Divine Deablo. I think tomorrow we'll, assuming that nothing major happens, I think we'll do a mailbag. We'll get your feedback and answer your questions. What are some of your lingering questions so far? And obviously, the Locked On Falcons Insiders have priority on that. And if you want to become a Locked On Falcons Insider, to get that priority, all you have to do is join at the link in the description below. You get a 14-day free trial, $4.99 a month. Not only do you get priority on future mailbags, you also get access to the exclusive film breakdowns that I do. We'll be doing one shortly in the next couple of days on the Falcons free agent pickups. And then we'll probably turn our attention back to the draft and looking at some of these, corners, safeties, whoever else, centers, I guess. We'll look at a couple of centers and see what's what on that front heading into the draft. So hit that link in the description at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons if you want to be part of that. But that's going to do it for us here. Continue to make us your first listen. Check out Locked On NFL Draft as your second listen to get the lowdown on those upcoming draft prospects that I'm sure will be amply discussed here on the podcast, especially once we get to April. So check us out. Locked On Falcons, Locked On NFL Draft. Check out Locked On Raiders. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.